What should we expect from Stefon Diggs, Gabriel Davis, and the Buffalo Bills wide receivers in 2023? I'm breaking that down today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Well, folks, I'm very excited to continue getting ready for training camp, which is fast approaching. It's like 2.5 weeks away from the Buffalo Bills reporting to training camp. And just like we did last week with quarterbacks, running backs, and tight ends, I want to talk all about the Bills wide receivers. Want to reflect on 2022, talk about the personnel changes and what that tells us about the direction of the position group. Of course, my biggest questions now and in the future, and then set our expectations for the Bills wide receivers in 2023. And there is a lot to dive into today. Let's get started. Let's first start by reflecting on 2022. And the Bills over the last 3 seasons have been a very, very productive receiving core. Not tight ends, not running backs, but wide receivers, and their collective production every single year has been near the top of the league. And as you may recall, last week when we went through running backs and we went through tight ends, we talked about how much production was really lacking collectively from those position groups when it came to catching the football, and in the case of the running backs, even running the football. Well, the Bills have been a very productive offense over the last 3 years, and that's because of the wide receivers. The bread and butter for the Bills over the last several seasons has been Josh Allen throwing the football to wide receivers. In 2022, only in accounting for actual wide receivers, no tight ends, no running backs, the Bills receivers caught 225 passes. That was 10th in the NFL for 3,074 yards, which was 7th in the NFL. Keeping in mind, the Bills only played 16 games where all other teams outside of the Bengals played 17. And so if the Bills actually played a 17th game, they would have been very easily in the top 3 in terms of receiving yards from wide receivers in 2022. And then they also had 24 receiving touchdowns, which was second most in the NFL. So very productive, top 10 in all categories, despite missing an entire game. And in previous years, it was even more production to the Bills wide receivers. Now, that's collectively how they produced. Let's talk a little bit more about the seasons that some of the main characters had. Of course, starting with Stefon Diggs, who in 2022 caught 108 passes, 1,429 yards, and 11 receiving touchdowns, which tied the franchise record for receiving touchdowns. It was a good year for Stefon Diggs. And we'll talk about how his production dipped over the last stretch of games as we continue this conversation. But in totality, when you look at the whole body of work last year, he was extremely productive. A passer rating of 124.3 when targeted, which was the highest of his career. And it was up significantly from 2021, where that was only a passer rating of 94 when targeted. It went to 124.3. He had a reception percentage of 72.5, up from 65% in 2021. He averaged 13.2 yards per reception, which was the most during his 3 years in Buffalo by a full yard. Yards after catch was still pretty low, but it was his best mark in 3 seasons in Buffalo. came up with a bunch of contested catches. His drop rate was a little higher than usual, actually, 7.7% drop rate, which was the second highest of his career. His career drop rate is 5%. So a little bit of a uptick in drops from Stefon Diggs in 2022. But at the end of the day, Stefon Diggs last year reminded us that he's still one of the premier wide receivers in the NFL. The production speaks for itself. He's a high-impact player. He does everything for the offense in terms of winning vertically, winning in the intermediate areas, winning quick, winning in contested situations, taking on a lot of coverage, right, in terms of the attention he commands. He does so much for the Bills offense. He's a legit, true, bona fide number one wide receiver in the NFL and one of the best receivers in the league. And he did that once again last year. Gabe Davis, let's shift the conversation to Gabe Davis. His volume production was good, right? 836 yards, 7 touchdowns. When you think wide receiver 2 production, that's solid. But the problem was a lot of the efficiency, a lot of drops, large average depth of target, not bringing in a lot of his receptions. There were some issues with Gabe Davis last year, and I've talked a lot about this, and I think some of you might be rolling your eyes right now saying Joe's going to go in on Gabe Davis and how limited of a route runner he is and all this stuff I've been saying all offseason. I'm not going to do that. If you want to hear my full Gabe Davis takes, go back to our April 12th episode, which was titled, Is Gabriel Davis the Right Wide Receiver 2 for Josh Allen? And I think Gabe Davis in an increased role, right? Obviously, the true number 2 receiver had over 100 targets on the year. You saw, I think, some of those limitations show themselves out over a larger sample size of targets, where in the past, when he's been the 4th or 5th option for the team, he was able to really capitalize on his strengths as a player, which is size, ball skills, down the field, physicality as a route runner. That stuff shows up in a more ancillary role. But when you give him a high volume of targets with the absence of a true slot presence, I think you're going to kind of see the worst of Gabe Davis, not to mention he had an early season ankle injury, which obviously limited him. We've heard, whether it was Josh Allen or Brandon Beane or Sean McDermott kind of talk about how he battled through that. Now, I would say that Gabe Davis last year was a lot like Gabe Davis the previous 2 seasons and even at UCF, just over a larger sample size. But I think there's a place for Gabe Davis to be a meaningful NFL wide receiver. There's a place for him to be a meaningful wide receiver for the Buffalo Bills. I just don't love it as a number 2 option because his route running limitations don't make him a do-everything player that can really win at all levels of the field. And so if you're going to lean into Gabe Davis, I think that comes with you leaning into a very legitimate slot option so that your spacing can be better based on some of the limitations that Gabe Davis has within his skill set, even when he's healthy. So kind of a mixed bag with Gabe Davis. Didn't necessarily meet the hype of coming off of the playoff performance he had against Kansas City and taking into this number 2 role and all that. But I think that there is a way for Gabe Davis to matter for this team and be a good player for this team. But it has to come in a different type of role than what he had last year, and I think with less volume. You also had Isaiah McKenzie last year, had 65 targets, continued to prove himself as a limited type slot player that commanded a lot more opportunity than he ever had throughout his career. And I think you saw the same inconsistent player you've always seen. Then you had Khalil Shakir, who was a rookie last year. Very intriguing player. Was on the field for 30% of the Bills' offensive snaps. I mean, that's basically a third. Didn't have a ton of volume in terms of production, only 10 catches on the season for 161 yards and a touchdown, with a lot of that coming only in a couple of games. But he was on the field a lot. He just didn't get a lot of targets, if you will. He did have 5 catches for 91 yards in the playoffs, but he's a player that I'm high on. I had a day 2 grade on him for the 2022 class. And I think he's a player that really intrigues me moving forward, especially when you think about how good he looked in the preseason, the flashes during the regular season, and, of course, him kind of gaining some more opportunity in the playoffs, which is good in terms of that trajectory of him as a player. So I'm excited to see what he looks like moving forward. And then you also had the Bills working in Cole Beasley from time to time off the practice squad, and John Brown and Tanner Gentry. Meanwhile, players that you anticipated rostering and having roles in Jamison Crowder and Jake Kumaro, they got injured pretty quick last season, and they weren't able to really make an impact, and they're no longer around. But collectively, when I think back to 2022 with the Bills and the receivers, Stefon Diggs was Stefon Diggs. But then I think there was a lot of inconsistency elsewhere. And collectively, I think the route running was lacking in ways that it hadn't in previous years. I think the route concepts were a little bit challenging in terms of having a lot of freedom for the Bills receivers to run routes. And I thought sometimes that led to some poor decisions by them, and you had some spacing issues within the offense. And then I think the team just really missed a true threat from the slot that I think would have helped their offensive spacing, given Josh Allen a good route runner to access the middle of the field and rely a little bit less on kind of that vertical stuff. And I think that's the stuff that stands out to me when I reflect on the Bills receivers last year. Now, there's quite a bit of change with the Bills receivers this year compared to last year. Like we mentioned, you had this group of Stefon Diggs, Gabe Davis, Isaiah McKenzie, Khalil Shakir. You thought you were going to have Crowder and Kumaro. You worked in John Brown and Cole Beasley. But this is a different looking group entering 2023. Now, you still have Gabe Davis and Steph Diggs and Khalil Shakir, but now it's Deonte Harty, Trent Sherfield, Justin Shorter being added to this mix to round out the receiving core. And to me, that says a lot. First of all, the Bills really wanted to solidify the depth at wide receiver. I mean, I don't think we're talking about this enough. Jamison Crowder, Jake Kumaro, 2 of the 6 receivers they probably planned on rostering and having all season, they got injured. And then the Bills turn around and bring in a couple of veteran players that, hopefully can provide more durability and really give the Bills a little bit more in terms of depth throughout the receiving core. But maybe even bigger than just wanting to solidify depth with veterans is there's a drastic emphasis on the skill sets that were brought in to be guys that can run routes and have secure hands, right? I think those were 2 issues with the Bills receivers last year. Not a lot of great route runners and just a ton of drops. Well, I think when you look at Deonte Harty, Trent Sherfield, and I want to include Dalton Kincaid into this mix because I think he's going to function primarily from the slot, you've gotten drastically better in terms of route running and hands. And I want to give you a metric here on the hands to kind of tell you how big of an uptick this is in efficiency with drop rate. So the Bills said goodbye to Devin Singletary, who had 52 targets last year. People forget that. And his career drop rate was 11%. That was the thing about Devin Singletary. His receiving production was often limited by himself by not catching the football. Isaiah McKenzie, 10.6% drop rate last year. Gabe Davis, a career drop rate of 11.3, over 12% last year. Now you have Deonte Harty, 5.9% career drop rate. Trent Sherfield, 6.9% career drop rate. And then Dalton Kincaid, who had 1 drop on 150 targets for his career at Utah. That's a 0.9% drop rate. So you've gotten drastically better in terms of depth and skill sets through improving your route running and improving the collective pass catching hands, right, of the guys that are going to catch a football from Josh Allen the most in 2023. So a lot of newness to this unit, which is going to create for a fun segment 2 where I really dive into the biggest questions now and in the future. But first, I need to tell you about LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be certain, 100% certain, that you have access to the best qualified candidates, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. It is so easy to create a free job post over at LinkedIn Jobs. So you create one, and then you add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. And then there's simple tools like screening questions that make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, let's continue this conversation about the Bills wide receivers entering 2023 by focusing in on my biggest questions now and in the future. And for some of this stuff, I'm not going to have an answer, but I have a question that leads me to a concern or something along those lines. And so let's consider this segment just a big thought dump of the things I'm thinking about with the Bills and their wide receivers entering 2023. And first of all, it's Stefon Diggs. I'm not really concerned about the skill set, the player, the role, all that type of stuff. It's whatever he has made it clear he's frustrated with or upset about with the Bills. Is it over? Josh Allen tells us it is. Sean McDermott certainly clarified after really, I think, his words saying that he was very concerned about the situation, escalated all of this. But what we know is that Stefon Diggs was animated during the playoff loss to Cincinnati. We know that he went on national shows and kind of expressed some concerns and left the team facility abruptly, didn't show up for any of the voluntary stuff, and then the weird mandatory OTA session that the whole week dominated. The entire NFL headlines were dominated by Stefon Diggs, and they still kind of are. And I don't want to make this bigger than it has to be, but until Stefon Diggs meets with the media and says something on record, to me, it's not over. I want to hear him say, it's behind us. I'm moving forward. I'm excited for the season. I can't wait to do my very best for this football team. Is he going to come out and say that, or is he going to be, non-direct and give us a sense that there's not complete resolution here? I want to feel that way. When Stefon Diggs meets with the Bills media at some point early in training camp, probably day one, we're going to get the clarity that we need, because nothing matters until Stefon Diggs speaks. That's the way I look at it. So that's my number one thing. I don't think I'm overly concerned about this, but I want to hear Stefon Diggs get in front of the Bills media and say, hey, I had some frustrations. We've worked through that. I'm confident in our plan moving forward, and I can't wait to be a great teammate moving forward. Something like that, right? That's what I need. And until we get that, I'm going to wonder. So Stefon Diggs, my number one question. My number two question is about Gabe Davis. And there's a lot there with Gabe Davis that I'm curious about. First of all, is there more to unlock with his game? Is he always just going to be a vertical receiver with size and ball skills? Can he be a more dynamic route runner? Can he offer more yards after catch? Can he separate quicker? Does his production look different if he's not battling an ankle injury in year two with Ken Dorsey as the offensive coordinator? How can the Bills find more efficiency there? How do they get the most out of Gabe Davis? I wonder if getting the most out of Gabe Davis actually means giving him less in terms of volume. I hope it's the case. I hope that Gabe Davis comes in around 70 to 80 targets this year and used in his most effective capacity, which unfortunately just is a low efficiency type role as a vertical receiver. But how do you get the most out of that skill set in your offense? It can matter. It's proven to matter throughout his career in Buffalo. He's made big plays in big moments. But how do you maximize that? I think part of that's going to be taking some of the blocking off of his plate, which I think will be absorbed by guys like Trent Sherfield or Justin Shorter or even Dalton Kincaid. But I feel like there's more there to get out of Gabe Davis. And as odd as it might sound, I think you get more out of him by using him less. Still a major part of what you do. But considering he's just a low efficiency player based on his skill set and the areas of the field that he wins, I think less is more with a guy like Gabe Davis. Which then kind of gets me into this whole speculation over his future in Buffalo. I've said it's my belief that I think the Bills are going to extend Gabe Davis. It feels like he embodies everything that the Bills love in a player in terms of DNA and how they work. He won some offseason award for, his work ethic and leadership during the offseason. All we ever hear about is how nobody's going to outwork Gabe Davis. Sean McDermott seems to love him. You hear Josh Allen talk about him. You hear Brandon Beane talk about him. There's a lot of love for Gabriel Davis. And I think they're going to extend him. And right now, I think he's coming in. If I had to project his salary, it would be around that $11 million a year plus, right? 11 to 15 is kind of the range I see for Gabe Davis. And I look at some recent contracts. In fact, all signed this offseason Alan Lazard to the Jets. Jacoby Myers signed with the Raiders. Devontae Parker re-upped with New England just like a couple weeks ago. They all got $11 million a season. Michael Gallup got $11.5 million a season. I think that's the world where Gabe Davis lives in. And if he goes out and has a great season and doesn't sign before the year, I think he can push for 15. Do you want to pay him that? Does that make sense? You can certainly pay a whole lot more for a wide receiver, but it's still a reasonable contract. There's some opportunity costs to be mindful of. If you give him $11 million a season, that's less that you can allocate to other spots on your roster. Has the trends of the NFL shown that you can get wide receiver production in the draft early in careers on day two? Do you just let them walk and kind of roll with what you have and draft a wide receiver in the first couple of rounds next year? Those are all ideas that Brandon Beane has to consider, but I feel like they're going to want to keep Gabe Davis. And I'd expect that to be at least $11 million a season. A few more questions that I have for the Bills receivers now and in the future. Next is Khalil Shakir and his role. I'm excited about the player, the skill set, some of the flashes last year. Where does he fit into this puzzle? How much opportunity does he get? Can he get at least 50 targets this year? I think he can. But will he? How much does Gabe Davis command this year? How much does Dalton Kincaid get? I mean, Khalil Shakir was on the field for 30% of the Bills' snaps last year. In terms of time on task with Josh Allen and the Bills' offense, he's a leg up on the other players. Even though Deonte Harty and Trent Sherfield are vets, I mean, Khalil Shakir is the guy that has a season of experience. And I'm optimistic for Khalil Shakir. I really like the skill set. I'm hopeful that the Bills can unlock something in year two with him. And of course, he provides depth as a return guy. Next question is, how do Trent Sherfield and Deonte Harty fit into this wide receiver core? I think Deonte Harty can do a lot of the Isaiah McKenzie stuff with horizontal jet motion, and I think he's a good route runner. He's got a ton of speed. He's just small, right? So I don't know that he's a high volume guy for this offense, but can he have a role? How big is it? Can he be a true X factor for this unit? I think there's a chance. Trent Sherfield's intriguing as well, where his blocking ability, his versatility, his size, his work ethic, the fact that he's already reportedly had some big moments with Josh Allen throughout the offseason and they've developed quick rapport. I mean, that's exciting. I like Trent Sherfield a lot. But you have Diggs, Davis, Shakir, Sherfield, Harty. That's 5 guys. Can they all matter in this offense? Then what is Justin Shorter's role as a rookie? I mean, he's got a really different type of skill set and body type than anybody else in this wide receiver core. Just extremely raw. But his size, his athleticism should show up on special teams, should give him some chances as a blocker, maybe some vertical shots to him. Think a lot about the way the Bills deployed Jake Kumaro, and I'd apply a lot of that to what I think you can get out of Justin Shorter. So I'm very curious to see how this all kind of comes together with some of these new additions. I'm intrigued by them all. Is it as simple as Justin Shorter's kind of a Jake Kumaro type role? Deonte Harty is an Isaiah McKenzie type role. Trent Sherfield is a Gabe Davis type role, but not as much volume. Maybe like 2021 Gabe Davis type player. It's exciting to see how this all plays out, but there's a lot of versatility. There's a lot of intriguing skill sets, not just within this wide receiver core, but within the Bills' offensive weaponry altogether. And that should create for a fun offense for Ken Dorsey to design. And the last question is very simply, do any of the depth wide receivers have a chance here? I mean, the Bills have some, like when you talk about bottom of the barrel roster players at wide receiver, the Bills are in pretty good shape at wide receiver. Isaiah Coulter, Desmond Patton, Keyshawn Johnson, Marcel Aitman. Those are all intriguing players that I think for some teams could be a sixth receiver and play teams and offer size. And those guys that's 4 intriguing options, and not to mention your UDFAs and Tyrell Shavers, Brian Thompson, and Jalen Wayne. I mean, the Bills are absolutely loaded with depth at wide receiver. And so does any of those guys, I mean, I just list like 7 players. Can any of them make some noise and really challenge Justin Shorter to be wide receiver 6? I'm sure a couple of them will stick on the practice squad, but can any of them show a little bit more? I'm intrigued to find out. All right, folks, we got to talk about our expectations in the next segment, which I got some stuff to say for sure there, but first need to tell you about Bird Dogs, a brand that I absolutely love. Their shorts, their joggers are awesome. They make you look good. Bird Dogs has these stretch khakis that are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg to give you a truly sculpted look, and they fit way better than regular shorts that are made of that stiff and restricting cotton. Bird Dogs fixed the issues. They invented cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki but stretches so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. And they also have this anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long, which this time of year is nice, right? Whether you want to be out playing golf or you want to be on a date night on a rooftop with your significant other, having that material is a game changer. So check it out. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL and enter promo code LockedOnNFL, and you'll get a free Yeti-style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL for a free Yeti-style tumbler. Folks, get yourself some Bird Dogs. You won't want to take them off. We promise you. All right, let's get into my expectations for the Bills wide receivers in 2023. And number one is, again, about Stefon Diggs, right? I mean, you talk Bills wide receivers, it's about Stefon Diggs, and then you go from there. But my expectation for Stefon Diggs is for him to challenge for the NFL receiving title. I mean, he's that type of guy, right? Every year I expect Stefon Diggs to be among the highest, if not the most productive receivers in the entire NFL. I mean, he's had a lot of opportunities, second in the NFL in targets since joining the Bills in 2020. But the big question with Steph Diggs is about down the stretch last year, how he faded, right? We've been through this in his first 12 games last year, 128 targets, 91 catches, 1,202 yards, and 10 touchdowns. The last 6 games, 40 targets, 28 catches, 376 yards, and only 1 touchdown. And then you only score 10 points in a home playoff loss to the Bengals, and Diggs has 4 catches for 35 yards. I think we have a good piece of what makes Diggs frustrated. And it's not probably just, okay, the production dipped. It's how that production dipped in relationship to the rest of the offense, and maybe some philosophical questions and concerns that Steph might have about how things operationally are running with the offense, and him having to wanting to have more impact and more input on that. So I expect Steph Diggs to show up and get a ton of targets, well over 150 targets, catch well over 100 passes, push for 1,500 yards plus. I'd love for him to break that touchdown record. He tied it last year. All you have to do is get 12 receiving touchdowns, and you'll have the single season record in Buffalo Bills history for most receiving touchdowns. I think you can get that. I'm looking for a great season out of Steph Diggs. Next, in terms of expectations, I want some stabilization with Gabe Davis. I understand who he is as a player, and I want to see the Bills deploy him in a way that stabilizes him and allows us to appreciate him for what he is. Because there's just the Gabe Davis discussion is all over the place. But at the end of the day, there's ways that you can get meaningful production. He can really be an asset for your offense. I want to see some stabilization in leaning into what he does best and allowing him to do that. I'd also like to see 1 or 2 of Khalil Shakir, Deonte Harty, Trent Sherfield, Justin Shorter to have meaningful ancillary roles. I think we have to be honest. They're probably not all going to be meaningful players for this offense, but can a couple of them do that? Do you have 250 target plus guys within that mix? That's what I hope to see. I want to see better route spacing. And you heard Josh kind of talk about this throughout the offseason, was having more ownership in the offense, locking in routes. I think that's going to be important, especially like Isaiah McKenzie running choice routes. You just can't do it. I want to see better spacing. And then I want to see this drop rate improve. And in terms of a plan for that to improve, as I already mentioned, kind of leaning more into Kincaid and Harty and Sherfield and how good they are in terms of historically catching the football. Maybe a little less to Gabe Davis, not having Devin Singletary drop passes. I think that's going to be big, right? I mean, drop pass. It's frustrating. It happens, right? You got to be realistic. You can't expect the Bills or any player or team to never have drop passes, but the frequency was just too high last year in some very high leverage moments where they happened that were very frustrating. And so I think this unit should be a lot better this year. Like I said at the open, kind of came away from 2022 really happy with Steph Diggs and then just wondering what else they have. I at least enter this year with a lot of optimism about how that can change. And part of that is the utilization of more running backs and tight ends in the passing game, but also just more efficiency to the receivers that you have. I'm excited to see it. I think Josh Allen has a good group of weapons around him. I don't find myself very concerned. Now, could the Bills add DeAndre Hopkins and this changes the entire conversation? Yeah, I think we should acknowledge that as a possibility. I don't know that it's likely at this point or anything like that. But I don't sit here right now thinking to myself, oh my gosh, the Bills got to get Hopkins or else they just don't have the weapons around Josh Allen for Josh Allen to go out there and play good enough football for this team to meet expectations. It's up to Ken Dorsey to kind of get this thing going, Josh Allen to take more ownership. And despite very good production, right, in terms of raw data, I think there's a higher level of consistency that this unit can achieve in some very critical areas that's going to make the Bills' offense even better. All right, folks, there we have it. The wide receiver discussion is in the books. Got a lot more coming for you this week. Of course, we're going to have herd mentality. I want to have an AJ Epinesa, Boogie Basham conversation this week at some point. We'll do this type of conversation centered around the offensive line. Got a lot to get to, so don't miss anything. Make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. Look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.